Thank you. Hi, everybody. I want to talk about hope this morning. Quick question just to pose, first of all, and feel free to respond to this in the chat, and we may be able to talk about some of your points in the breakout room afterwards. But I would like to think for a moment about how you would describe the level of hope amongst your students at the moment, and what you would say are the top three contributing factors to their hope levels. I want to explore this a little bit because I would say that over the past year, we've all had a growing awareness, society as a whole has had a growing awareness of mental health. And I think that's a positive that's come out of the pandemic. But it raises issues for us as schools. Three distinct points here, because I think, first of all, we need to recognize, if we're going to tackle the mental health epidemic, that we need to address this as a whole school issue, not simply a student issue. This is about taking seriously our own mental health as teachers, as staff, the culture that we are working in and exacerbating, the example that we are modeling to our students. Secondly, I think we need to take seriously our role to prevent poor mental health rather than simply address it and respond to it when it arises. If we don't do that, if we simply respond or react to growing issues, then we're going to have increasing self-harm, increasing drug misuse issues, and therefore an increasing workload as we try to firefight on those issues. We've got to shift back our thinking and think about, okay, well, how do we put the steps in place in order to address issues before they arise? And that leads to really having a robust understanding of the causes of poor mental health, so that we're not simply addressing the symptoms, we're thinking through about the contributing factors and how we can build into our systems, into our education, a provision that addresses those causes. So that's what I kind of want to hone in on here, because I think there is a key cause, a key underlying reason for poor mental health, and arguably it is a loss of hope, a loss of belief that things can get better. Mark Manson describes it like this. He says, hope is the fuel for our mental engine. Without hope, your whole mental apparatus will stall out or starve. We spiritually die. The opposite of happiness is not anger or sadness. No, the opposite of happiness is hopelessness, an endless grey horizon of resignation and indifference. Now, those two words there, I wonder whether they resonate with you. I wonder whether you can identify those traits in your students. Would you say there is an increased level of resignation and indifference? And that raises the question, how do we address that? What are we doing to counteract that resignation and that indifference that may be on the rise amongst our students? I think we need to have an awareness of why students may be at an all-time low, why as a society there may be a loss of hope culturally in our society, in our globe. And that means having an awareness of the prevailing issues. Arguably there has been over the past year a perfect storm of contributing factors which understandably could leave our students feeling hopeless. First, you might point to the loss of trust in education. I think this was demonstrated with poignancy in the exams debacle last summer, when students felt like, okay, what they had worked for, what they thought was fair, what they thought was reliable, suddenly wasn't, and suddenly their fate was trusted to an algorithm, and that undermined that sense of trust in education and led to a kind of a powerlessness. Then there's a growing disillusionment with politics. I think the Trump years have taken their toll. Brexit has undoubtedly taken its toll. The sense that there is so much misinformation out there, and the polarization of political views in society that has therefore ensued, leaves students feeling like, well, what is the point? What do I even know? I don't even know what is true. Mass awareness of mass injustice, the Black Lives Matter movement has brought this to the fore. We can't get away from the sense that injustice is baked into our systems, our institutions on a global level. And that again can exacerbate those feelings of powerlessness. What's the point? It's all just so unfair. Of course, climate emergency, that's never far from the news. And that sense that students, that their generation is careering towards an impending doom that was not caused by them, but there's that sense that there's a political complacency out there, that really nothing major is going to change about that. That kind of contributes and compounds that sense of hopelessness. We could look at the demise of religion over decades, and the void that has left, that has arguably been filled by social media and a consumer culture that measures worth by how many followers you have or what brand you wear. That's really important, that we have that social awareness of how society over the past few decades has changed. And then, of course, you throw a pandemic in the mix, and the sense that the world is in a worse state than it has ever been, rightly or wrongly. That is the sense that our news channels and our news feeds are perpetuating and compounding on a daily basis. Things are worse than ever. And that sense of the loss of liberty and autonomy that has derived from government response to that and lockdown, that again leaves people feeling powerless. There's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do to change things. I'm just a pawn in somebody else's game, the powers that be. And of course, you mix in with that dysfunctional family relationships, which of course are always present, but arguably have been exacerbated in some cases over this past year by the pressures that have ensued because of the pandemic. All of these factors understandably leave not just students, but human beings in general feeling hopeless. And I think we need to address that. We need to be aware of that. We need to think, okay, well, what messages are we perpetuating in our school context to counteract that sense of a loss of hope? Now, I'd argue that there are three basic ingredients to hope, three things that you need to believe if you're going to have hope. Number one, you've got to believe that things can change. If things can't get any better, well, then what's the point? Secondly, the belief that I can change things, that I have some power, some autonomy myself, some sense that I can impact things. If I can't, well, again, then what's the point? And thirdly, there needs to be the belief that others share that will to change. Because if I'm the only one who cares, and I'm the only one who's really trying, and the people around me essentially don't share that will to change, well, then again, what's the point? That statement, what's the point? I wonder how many times you've heard that. I think that is on the rise, and I think we need to address that. And this is where I think our role as teachers and educators is so significant, in that we have the power on a daily basis to be hope generators. We are the hope generators for a generation. The problem is, if we ourselves have lost hope, and it would be understandably, I've certainly wavered over the past year, feeling like, what's the point? Feeling like, does anything really matter? Can things get better? If we don't evaluate and take stock of our own sense of hope, it's of course inevitable that loss of hope, or that sense of doubt, will perpetuate and be propagated with our context, even unwittingly. So my challenge here today is to ask you the question about your hope levels, and to what extent you still believe in your students, believe in yourself, believe in people, believe in our power to change, because that will be bleeding through. Freud said we bleed our beliefs through every pore. I love that. And I think that's true. Without even realizing it, our underlying assumptions and beliefs will emanate. So three things, therefore, that I think we need to believe if we're going to move forward, if we're going to be successful hope generators for a generation. Now, this is a little bit philosophical, and this is my view, and you may disagree with it, but I'm going to make the argument here for hope. And of course, I'd be interested for you to reflect on that. So first of all, we need to believe that better is possible. To start a better world, we've got to start with the belief that a better world is possible. Now, I mentioned the demise of religion. That has led to the growth of nihilism. Nihilism is that sense that nothing really matters, that belief in nothing, that there's no intrinsic value to anything. There's a void that's been left, and that has led to the increase of a basic utilitarian ethic, the belief that value is derived from utility, from usefulness, that you are useful or you have value to the extent that you are useful. And that in turn leads to the belief that life is basically expendable if it is deemed to be of little or no value. Now, the issue here is, and this is, as I say, a prevalent ethic in society, arguably the dominant ethic of our age is utilitarianism. We measure value by worth, by usefulness. Now, the problem is, who says what's useful? What I perceive to be useful, what society perceives to be useful and of value, is not necessarily what is of value or is of use. And it is understandable for our students to be feeling, okay, well, I am not useful, I have no worth, or that my worth is derived from how many followers I've got on TikTok, or that my worth and my value is derived from whether I hit this standard of beauty that is perpetuated by the media and the beauty industry out there. If I don't view myself to be of sufficient worth, then what's the point? I don't have value. Now, I think there's a danger in that belief that we need to be careful to counter. And I don't think, I'm not arguing that we need to go or embrace a religious or a supernatural worldview in order to have that belief in intrinsic value, in innate value. I don't think a secular worldview needs to inevitably lead to a nihilistic belief in meaninglessness. I think there is basis, in fact, for believing in the innate value of every human person, based upon three things. Number one, based upon every human person's uniqueness. And I say this to students in almost every talk I do. Never before in the history of the universe has there ever been another you to walk this planet. After you die, there will never be another you ever again to walk this planet. And I honestly believe that every single one of you listening has a unique contribution to make to this world. And there's no one else on earth who can make that contribution like you can. Now, I think there is basis there for meaning, for value based on the uniqueness of every human person. And that leads to the unique creative potential of every human person, that every person, every student has ideas, has a perspective, has feelings and emotions and a perspective on the world that can be expressed. And that expression impacts others and has the potential to impact others in a way that nobody else's expression and perspective can. Now, that is powerful. I honestly believe that is a powerful message that we need to be communicating to our students. And in turn, that in turn leads to a belief in the capacity of every human person to give and receive love. There's something about our ability as human beings to give and receive love, which leaves an indelible impact on the lives of others. And you will know, if you've ever lost a loved one, you will know that that person is irreplaceable. Yes, you may marry again. Yes, you may have other kids, more kids. That makes no difference. You cannot replace that one who left. That one who you lost is irreplaceable. Their love is something distinct and different from anybody else's love. Now, that's the same for every human being on the planet. Is that not something that we can communicate to our students to give them the sense that their lives matter, their contribution matters, their impact matters on the people around them? Now, the second core belief that I think we need to embrace is the belief in our students' power to change, the belief in their ability to change themselves. And I think that means embracing fully and embedding in our school cultures a growth mindset about progress. We need to eradicate, I would say, from our vocabulary, phrases and terminology like C grade student or A grade student. Eliminate from our academy phrases like low ability or middle ability, or terms like bright and able or low or less able, because all of those terms consolidate a sense that my ability is a sense that I can't do anything outside that. I can't push the boundaries beyond that. And I think our institutions of learning ought to be places that fully embrace, and we know this, we know about the plasticity of the human brain, and that neural pathways change and develop with time and with focus and with practice. The power of practice, emphasizing the significance of grit, but never forgetting the importance of our belief in them. You may have come across what's known as the Pygmalion effect. This was derived out of some studies that a psychologist called Bob Rosenthal did in the 1960s about the significance of belief on outcomes. And one particular study he did, he had students randomly assigned to two groups, but then the teachers of those students were told that the one group had high potential and the other group had low potential, and they were tracked over the course of a year. Now, the students were not told which group they were in, and they were not communicated the label. What they found in observing these classes over the course of a year was that unwittingly, the teachers gave more praise, more encouragement, and more time to the students that were labeled high potential than those that were labeled low potential. And in turn, the outcomes of those high potential students, who were only high potential in name, they're randomly selected, was that their IQ scores significantly increased over the course of just 1 year. Now, this is powerful. There's a whole bunch of study out there which consolidate this idea, this Pygmalion effect, the fact that our belief in others affects their belief in themselves, which in turn affects their approach to life, to work, and in turn impacts their outcomes. We cannot underplay the significance of our role as teachers in instilling self-belief in those people that we teach. If we don't believe in them, then they absolutely will not believe in themselves. The third key core belief that I believe we need to embrace in terms of our role as generators is to believe in the basic goodness of all human beings. Now, for centuries, our culture has adopted arguably the opposite of that, what's known as veneer theory, the belief that basically underneath the veneer, underneath the surface, if you leave humans alone, if you take away law and order, then basically our dark side will come to the fore. This was obviously famously demonstrated in William Golding's novel, The Lord of the Flies, that the Christian doctrine of original sin has exacerbated and consolidated this belief and spread it, that idea that human beings are basically evil at heart. We all have that bias towards evil. Thomas Hobbes famously said, life in the state of nature is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Now, the problem is there's good reason to believe that actually this is not true. And Rutger Bregman, I wholeheartedly recommend his book, Humankind. This is a comprehensive, robust look at human nature and the evidence that supports the thesis that human beings are basically good. And in that, he talks about the real life Lord of the Flies, a case where a bunch of schoolboys were actually washed up on an island and shipwrecked for 18 months. And the fact that in reality, what they got up to and how things developed was the direct opposite of Golding's version of Lord of the Flies. Fascinating, fascinating book, but it affects what we believe and our approach to education, our approach to the world, and our ability to instill hope in others. What we believe affects the beliefs of those around us. I never cease to be inspired by Anne Frank's words in her diary, written in the darkest of times. I keep my ideals because in spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. We have the power in our schools to inspire our students. What are we perpetuating? What beliefs are we challenging? Some of the prevailing beliefs that are emanating in society through a whole host of means. Are we taking seriously our role as hope generators? I'm not talking about perpetuating or selling to our students any kind of a false hope, a promise of fairy tale endings. Of course not. I'm talking about a robust, gritty hope based in reality that today I can make changes which will improve tomorrow. That has power. That has power for our students. That has power to change society. Viktor Frankl was a Jewish Austrian psychologist imprisoned in Auschwitz during the Second World War. He wrote a little book afterwards called Man's Search for Meaning. Fascinating book, absolutely brilliant. You may well have heard it or come across it yourself. He survived the Holocaust. He lost his entire family. He talks in his book about how in those death camps, he saw the flicker go out in different people's eyes. He saw the flame go out. And when that flame went out, it was a very short period of time between then and when that person died. They gave up on the inside, and therefore their body gave up as well. And he talks about how their captors took away every freedom that they had. But he said everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. What I'm arguing here is that we as teachers, we as leaders can make a choice to believe in our students, to believe in better. And that choice to believe will have a contagious impact on our school environments and on our students. Edmund Locard was a forensic scientist. He coined the phrase in looking at crime scenes that every contact leaves a trace. Every contact leaves a trace. I wholeheartedly believe that every single one of our students will leave a trace on this planet. They will leave an impact, whether for good or for bad. Our role is to communicate to them just that. Their contact will leave a trace. It will matter. It will make an impact. The challenge is to leave a good trace, not a bad one, to leave a positive trace, to leave a trace that makes an indelible positive impact on our world. Every contact leaves a trace. I want you to consider simply some of the points that I've said. Some of you may disagree with, as I've said, but could it be that we have lost a little bit of hope ourselves as teachers? Could it be that we need to reevaluate our beliefs about our students, about the world, and take seriously our role as hope generators for a generation?